As one of the most pivotal groups of characters in the Shannara universe, the Druids have a history that is long, complicated, and spread out over a number of books, much like the Elcrease. As I have mentioned in an earlier video, the Druid Order rose from the ashes of the Great War that destroyed our world. After generations apart, the survivors of this great cataclysm began to gather together again, remnants of man that had once shared a common humanity. However, it quickly became clear that time, environmental hardship, and evolution had pushed these people so far apart that they were now distinct with their own identity and destiny. These group of survivors became the Troll, Dwarf, and Gnome nations that we see in the books and the TV series. They were given these names by the remnants of humanity that rode out the war, fallout, and evolution of the land and races in a valley protected by the magic of a creature called the Gypsy Morph. Quickly, these differences, confused even further by the newly evolved languages that each race spoke, sparked conflict. It looked like another war was looming just beyond the horizon. In the midst of this power keg moment, the wisest members of each new race, having been entrusted with safeguarding knowledge and history, chose to step forward and attempt to stop this new disaster before it could begin. These men and women were led by Galaphile, an elf from Arborlon. And thus the Druids were born, and the first Druid Council was formed at the newly built fortress of Paranor. Taking their name from the wise, mysterious figures of humanity's past, these new Druids would pool their influence, personal power, and knowledge to lead the races into a brighter future. The Druids gathered together all the knowledge they could on the arts, history, and science. Around this time, magic began to be rediscovered by the non-elven races and was brought to Paranor for study. It was quickly deemed too unreliable, and so was viewed as a taboo subject to be tolerated but not encouraged. As time went on, things seemed to be going well. Knowledge was gathered, studied, and understood to then be released to this new world of the Forelands. Eventually, a small group of Druids, led by the Druid Brona, broke away from the first council, believing the Druids should be shaping and dictating the destiny of the Forelands and the races that live there, as opposed to just kind of helping along on the side. Brona and his followers left Paranor, taking with them the Ildach, one of the most powerful and dangerous books of dark magic recovered by the Druid Order. 150 years later, Brona reemerges, leading an army of men seduced by a promise that they would once again be the dominant force in the world if they just would follow him. The conflict would come to be known as the First War of the Races, and would eventually be won by a unified army of the other races led by the Druids of Paranor. Sometime after this war, the first Druid Council is disbanded. We don't know why. And a second council convened. This council felt that the best policy for the Druids going forward was one of non-involvement with the Forelands, preferring instead to study the history and science that had been gathered at Paranor. After a few hundred years of this status quo, a druid named Bremen, cast out of the order for his refusal to study science, instead favoring magic, returns warning them of Brona's imminent return. Bremen believed that the first target of this revived Warlock Lord would be Paranor, since he remembered how it was the Druids who led the opposition to him last time. Unfortunately, his warning fell on deaf ears. Just a few days after his warning was delivered, Brona and his army attack and take Paranor with the help from traders inside the keep itself. Brona killed all the Druids at the keep, effectively ending the Second Druid Council in one fell swoop. This would be the spark that led to the Second War of the Races, this time with the gnomes and trolls being used by Brona as opposed to men. It was at this time that Bremen forged the Sword of Shannara, and a child of the House of Shannara would face the Warlock Lord for the first time. As we should all know by now, the Warlock Lord is defeated but not killed, ending the Second War of the Races but not the threat of the Warlock Lord. During the battle, Bremen happened on a young boy who he sensed had great untapped potential for magic. This boy fought by Bremen's side during the climactic battle of the war, and later became his adopted son, Alanon. 3 years after the Second War of the Races, Bremen passes on to the waters of the Hadeshorn, and Alanon became the last of the Druids. For the next 500 years, Alanon would be the only Druid to walk the Forelands, protecting its people, knowledge, and magic. From the moment Alanon became the last of the Druids to the time a new council was formed, the Third Council, it would be 1,000 years. The council's future would be secured by Walker Bow, née Omsford, the first new Druid in 300 years and a direct descendant of Bryn Omsford. Unfortunately, he would not live to see his life's work come to fruition, but before his death he passed on the responsibility to a distant relative, an ancestor of Jair Omsford, Grianne. This Third Council, under the leadership of Grianne and heavily populated by elves, dedicated itself to preserving the land, a strongly held ideal of the elves and the Omsfords. Unfortunately, due to Grianne's checkered past as a villain, the work of the Druids was slow-going and mostly ineffectual. After a disastrous war that featured a divided Druid order, Grianne disbanded the Third Council, leaving behind 3 Druids whom she trusted and in whom the best of what the order could be were personified. From these 3 Druids, a 4th Council would rise many years later, led by Kyber Lesidel. And this is the order that we find in the books today. And that's it. That is a brief history of the Druids. So that's it for now. I will be releasing another video hopefully soon. If you have any requests, put them in the comments and I will do my best to get to them.